Okay, it is Tuesday, February the 26th, 2019, and it's about 8:31 p.m. Central Standard Time. Welcome to week 4 of Introduction to Criminal Law. And you know my name, but just so you know, Professor Richard Wright. And I'm going to be with you for roughly the next hour going over the information for week 4. As you should be aware of, we have 2 more lectures to go. The quarter will be over March 15th. That is the exact date. And we're at the point now where, unless there are extenuating circumstances, I will not be accepting assignments from week 1, week 2, or week 3 anymore. Because we're at the midterm. This is the second half. Week 4, 5, and 6. And this is a pretty quick quarter, as I shared with you at the beginning. So let's get right into, let me share my screen. Okay, and move that up there. So you're familiar with all of this information here. I just do want to remind you that I stress over and over and over to all of you, your rubrics, it's highlighted right here. Rubrics are so important to determine your grade. And I've said this over and over and over, and I keep saying it, that many of you lose points because you don't follow the rubric, or you don't satisfy all sections of the rubric. Very important that you, when you complete your paper, make sure that you have complied with all sections of the rubric to maximize your grade. One of the premier issues that many of you lose points on relates to APA. And APA is very, very important, not just in this course, but in this entire school. We have provided you with details on it. Take time to go over here, where I am right now, and click on this. And if you don't understand APA, it opens up. This is an APA guide. This is everything you need to know about APA. How to do citations, it's on the left side, getting started. How to prevent plagiarism. There are some videos that help you, but you have to take the time to do it. How to format properly, how to do in-text citations, whether it's a case, a statute, or an article. Noodle tools to help you do your cover page and to format that properly and to make sure that your reference page is done, and other things in here. But writing an APA style. But the key thing is that the toolkit gives you a quick tutorial to help you. There is a video, and I've said to a few people, look at the video. Think about what you're doing. Look at some of these links down here. It's well worth it for you to become familiar with this, because it will benefit you not just in this class, but it will benefit you overall. It is in the syllabus that we talk about that. It is in the open house. It is every week, and it is in the rubrics. Then there's critical thinking. If you don't know what that is, and I mention that all the time. Take a look at this video. Copy and paste it, put it on your browser, and look at it. And you will learn a lot about it. Then the rubric for discussion posts is a very basic rubric. And the key is to make sure your assignments are content-oriented, not just one-liners, not just brief comments, but information addressing the issues of the discussion forum. You do that with your initial post and your reply post. I like it when you provide citations in the body and references in the end, or one or the other. You don't get any extra points, but it lets me know that where you're getting the information from. And I want you to get into that habit. And then the other thing is it's good to reply to more than one post because you're opening up the discussion between you and your classmates and myself, that we can converse back and forth, because remember, we're not meeting up physically. The closest thing to it is this live lecture, and many of you don't come to it. But the point of the matter is that so the discussion forum is contemporaneously where you're exchanging information back and forth throughout the course of the week. And as you already know, discussion posts are due Tuesday nights, which is tonight at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, for the topic that we mentioned in a few minutes. And the reply post is due Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. So now, again, our lectures right now will be taking place every Tuesday, 8:30 to roughly 9:30. And you know the link. All right, the link's all over the place. So I have copies of lectures from weeks 1, 2, and 3. After this is over, you'll see week 4, as well as I will be emailing it to you as well. And so here are some announcements that are remaining. The welcome announcement is there for you to look at anytime you get ready to. But I want to focus now on the weekly announcement, which gives you the details of assignments. Again, one of the things that you discover from me is I go over the assignments probably more than most professors, because I cover it, because sometimes students miss it at one location, they miss it in one part. I have to apologize to those of you who get it the first time, but there are so many students who need me to repeat it. So this week, Module 4, Crimes Against Government and Public Order, will be covered. I sent you the PowerPoints for Chapter 8 of your textbook, and then we're going to go over the activities: domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing police, disorderly conduct, and free speech. Then you can look at the key terms for practice, free speech or disorderly conduct, and do the practice quiz, because it is very important. Last week, week 3, you had a quiz. That's basically your midterm. Next one you're going to have is going to cover weeks 4, 5, and 6. That will be in week 6. So you want to practice, because the quizzes help to get you brought up to speed on the terminology or the issues that you need to be aware of in order to use the materials to achieve success in your grades. Okay, and then there's a discussion assignment, obstruction of justice. Again, I already said what the deadlines are on that. And then your written assignment for this week is fleeing or eluding police. We're going to go over the requirements in a few minutes. They're located in the module, but they're also located in the rubric, and we're going to cover that. And then I asked you to complete the mid-quarter student survey, because we are in mid-quarter, and I encourage you to submit those, because they help us to do a better job. If there's some place where we're falling short, something you'd like to see, or there's some areas that you'd like to have covered, then leadership and our teams can read those. And then you know what my motto is all about, because I covered that during the open house. So now let's go quickly and let's look at the course calendar. Again, you click on the course calendar up in the right corner where you'll find yours, and then it tells you your reading assignment, just like what I just covered a few minutes ago. It then tells your initial post, tells you when it's due, which is tonight, the live lecture. Again, it gives you the link right there on the calendar. Then your reply post, same thing. Then finally, we're in March, your written assignment. And if you open it up, it's going to tell you look at the module and the rubric. the module and the rubric. So that is important. So we're going to go over that in just a minute. And then the other checkbox is to remind you that your live lecture keyword or phrase is due by 11:59 p.m. on March 3rd for this week. Okay? And as you can see, let me just touch on our March calendar, which you'll see this week's as well. So you can see where we are this week. All right? But you see after that, there's 2 more weeks left. And you see that the course ends on the 15th, not the 17th, but the 15th. That's when our class will be completed. So you have 2 more weeks. So basically, this is where we are right now for the second half of the course. All right? Okay, now let's leave that. And let's go to the module again. Let's go over the assignments a little more in detail. The discussion assignment, I'm not going to go over it in detail, but you can follow the steps in there. Some of you have done pretty good with that. And now we're getting into the actual written assignment, and it is a 2-part assignment. It is not a part 1 only or part 2. And part 1 tells you to examine the type of crime committed. So you're going to use this fact scenario. And then you're going to complete the assignment by reviewing the sample police pursuit policy. That you click on that, and it opens up in the form of a Word document, and then a Supreme Court case. Now, a minimum of 2 pages. You've got to make sure you satisfy that, and you address these 6 issues. Notice very importantly at the last one, if you use your textbook or other outside sources, include a reference page, APA citation, and form requirements. Please be sure to cite the resources. Now, you already know from your course homepage that your textbook should not be the sole source of your paper, because there are plenty of resources that are available to you. And you can find those at the bottom here. There it is right there. It tells you where you can find the information guides, your weekly written assignment, your online library, which you can use for research, and again, another place to find access to APA, Toolkit, Tutoring, and Writing Lab. All right? So anyway, so you're going to do part 1, which is 2 pages. Then the second part, and you should be familiar with this because you had to do this with identity theft already, is that you're going to, as part of this, a 1-page flyer related to vehicle pursuits, and review the statute here as a sample. This is as if you were in this agency or this jurisdiction. In your flyer, explain the elements of the statute that need to be proven in a fleeing or eluding case. Explain, identify, and then provide at least 3 techniques. There's a template. There's a statute you look at, and then there's a template that helps you to put together your flyer. All right, so you will be graded on that entire thing. Now, let's go back and let's see what the rubric says. You click on the assignment. It tells you first when it is due, and then you can click on and open up the rubric. And the rubric tells you you get 15 points if you satisfy the issues involved here. You get another 5 points for paragraphs. Writing proper. Your paragraph should be not very long. You know, I've seen papers where people submit, and the whole paper is one long paragraph. We don't want you to do that, okay? And then your APA citations, we already talked about that. Then the second part, you'll get 15 points if you satisfied the requirements of creating the proper flyer. for a total of 40 points. That's why I said make sure that you have, before you turn in your paper, satisfied the rubric. And that's your assignment, okay? So now let's move on. The time that we have left, and go to the Lessons tab. Okay, let's go back. Here we go, Lessons Content. So this is what we're going to be discussing. These elements, dealing with crimes against government and public order. You know that's the title of this week's module. And obstruction of justice, resisting arrest and fleeing, and the difference between free speech and disorderly conduct. So we are going to discuss domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing police, and then we're going to conclude the lecture with dealing with disorderly conduct and free speech. And then I'm just going to quickly just show you again how the key terms work. All of these are this from here, key terms, where it says for practice and for practice, are encouraged you. Please hear what I'm saying. I guarantee you it will benefit you. Students say, oh, my schedule is tight. Your schedule can't be so tight that you can't take time to go over this. It's like drilling yourself, getting yourself ready for your assignments, as well as, again, remember, there is a quiz coming up in week 6. And all of these things, these practice things, will help you to be brought up to speed to properly answer those questions that come up. Okay? So what's going on? Well, you can't even turn on the TV, look at the news, without hearing some kind of domestic terrorism. And, you know, since September the 11th, and actually before that, but not as big as September 11th, but the terrorism that took place on our American soil, the one that I remember that was the biggest one before the September the 11th World Trade Center was the Oklahoma City bombing. And as you know, that the Oklahoma City bombing was not based on foreign terrorists, but were individuals who were American citizens who were born and raised in the United States. And so, as a result, September 11th was dealt with foreign terrorism. And then since that time, you should be aware of the fact that there's been many terroristic activities. You're talking about what happened in Las Vegas last year. You're talking about what happens at Parkland School, Columbine before that, college campuses, workplace killings like the one that took place at Henry Pratt here in our jurisdiction, with everybody all over the United States is familiar with. And so we have our agencies, the DEA, we're dealing with, but primarily the FBI and Homeland Security, and many of your local law enforcement agencies, your state, your county, and your municipal organizations. So, and the point of it is that these activities generally are said to, the force is used to intimidate a government or a civilian population or some part of it in furtherance of political or social objective. Some people might say, well, would that Henry Pratt fit in there? Yeah, it fits in there because of the number of people that it adversely affects. And you'll see when I talk about how it's broadly defined. So, so again, terrorism can be domestic, as I've been talking about already, or dealing with other countries. And so the bottom line is that there are state-sponsored activities by other organizations like Al-Qaeda and other organizations of that nature. So let's talk about international terrorism for just a few minutes and see what the requirements are for it. And these 4 bullet points lay it out quite clearly. Something that's dangerous to the life occurs outside the U.S. in a foreign country. And then there are violations of the laws of state that's committed within the jurisdiction or any of the state. So that's intended to coerce the population, civilian population, their attention. That's like the anthrax. Like what happened in the churches, in the synagogues, these kinds of things, to intimidate or coerce someone, affect the conduct by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. So that's why those things I said do fit in that area. And so I already talked about September the 11th as one example when I talked about the Oklahoma City. So that was international, but again, it was carried out by a foreign terrorist group on American soil. Therefore, it's considered as international. So domestic terrorism is carried out, it says, who are from within their own country and carry out the attack against fellow citizens, government, or any segment thereof. And the objectives are similar to those of international terrorist group. That's what happened with Las Vegas. That's what happened at that in Orlando, Florida, at that nightclub. That's what has happened in these schools, Parkland, Columbine. It happened here in Illinois a few years ago at a college, Northern Illinois University. And it goes on and on and on. And then another example, which this brings back to me, is the Olympic Park bomber. You know, when the, what was it, the Boston Marathon, in which Eric Rudolph targeted an anti-abortion, and for example, the Olympic Park bomber, Eric Rudolph targeted anti-abortion clinics, which resulted in 2 deaths and others. But then there was the Boston Marathon as well. There are so many instances. I talked about the one involving in 1995 with Timothy McVeigh, where he and another American citizen, and there it goes on and on and on. So who is responsible for dealing with these? Well, first of all, the federal government deals with it, but the local governments work hand in hand with the feds. And so we deal with organizations like the FBI and Homeland Security, which incidentally, Homeland Security did not exist prior to September 11th. And after September 11th, the devastating act of terrorism international that took place in New York City caused the federal government to create a separate agency to deal with terrorists. And then there was a law that was passed, the Patriot Act, which everyone's kind of familiar with, which deals with trying to, as they say, get a grip on terrorism. But as you can tell, terrorism comes out of everywhere. Notice the society that we're in now because of this is that I remember going to school and going to games where you didn't have to deal with metal detectors. I even remember starting out as a lawyer in 1978, they didn't have metal detectors. But now they have metal detectors not just in criminal court, but in all courts. As you know, whenever there's a public event, such as the Super Bowl or NBA championship or Olympics, there's always a high level of security that takes place, because what people want to do is they want to make a name for themselves by committing terrorist acts and things of that nature. You probably were aware recently that there was a person who had high security, government-wise, and the feds shut him down, was a plan to kill some senators, presidential candidates, the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and several others involved. Chuck Schumer of the U.S. Senate. The bottom line is an attempt to control the government, as well. The situation happened, as you recall, in Charlotte, where the same thing happened, and it resulted in a death as well. So the point of the matter is we're in an era where we have the organizations, federal, state, and local, designed to deal with those kinds of things. So now let's talk about obstruction of justice. Now, the term itself is self-explanatory. It means you're obstructing the law. It means you're trying to circumvent the law. And it's not just lying, but it includes purposely misleading the police or withholding evidence that prevents government from effectively investigating criminal matters. Obstruction of justice can happen in many criminal proceedings. We're aware right now that one of the biggest forms of obstruction of justice is involving the investigation of Empire star Jesse Smollett. And from hearing over and over and over, he put out that he was a victim of a hate crime. And then there was information that came forth that now has turned his statements around to say that in reality he did that for his own gain. He used law enforcement resources. He, if it's true, he damaged individuals like the LGBT organization or group of people. In other words, investigating hate crimes took a slap, not to mention the city of Chicago itself, as the chief of police has gone on national TV and discussed. But the fact of the matter is that we don't know what's going to happen with that because we haven't seen what Mr. Smollett's defense team has in terms of responding to that. So we're going to keep our eyes on that. But the fact of the matter is that this is how you get to these allegations. So obstruction of justice in a criminal proceeding takes place when you take the stand and you raise your right hand and solemnly swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and then you proceed to lie. Well, we call that in the criminal sense perjury, and it can send you to jail. That's why we talk in terms of our criminal justice professionals being ethical, and that you provide accurate reports. You don't deal with the code of silence. You do your job in an ethical, professional manner. Perjury can come back and cause you to end up going to jail. Another form of obstruction of justice, when, as back to what we just talked about, is when someone misleads the police. When they lie or mislead the police in the performance of their duties. That's like the example we just got through talking about. So police are there, and you don't have to talk to them, but if you do choose to waive the Fifth Amendment right, which you don't have to, you can remain silent, but if you choose to answer them, they need to be honest and truthful. Otherwise, you're dealing with obstruction of justice. And the reason for that is because an example of what I just talked about with the Smollett's case is that law enforcement is going to proceed on the basis of that. And there have been many of these. There's been instances where I remember a white female once said that a black person killed her kids and drove them off into the water. It turns out she was the one who did it. It was a concocted story. And you hear them over and over and over and over, okay? But it says here, lying to police is a criminal violation and prevents the police from doing their jobs. And then these are some of the elements. Notice this, that a particular person is committing a crime knowing that such information is false, intending that the agency acts in reliance of that information, that the law enforcement officer, if you're a law enforcement officer, commits a crime in the performance of their duties, such as false or misleading, like I said, submitting false reports or misleading reports, information knowing that such information is false, any information concerning death, disappearance, or potential death of a child under the age of 13, concealing, destroying, or materially altering evidence to prevent the apprehension of a person, and the final one involves hiding someone out. So, you know, this is an article that you can read, but because of what I just covered a few minutes ago, most of the elements are covered here. All right. So now, you can be, if the police see you engaged in something that maybe they think that looks suspicious, the police have a right to ask you your name, your personal information, and you can be arrested if you give them false information or refuse to give them and charged with a misdemeanor. So no, you're not required to answer questions beyond personal information. So you talk about the Terry stop, or the Terry versus Ohio, which allows for a person to be stopped and questioned for a short period of time, and it also allows an individual going to identify themselves and tell the truth. And then there's another case that goes with it, MAP v. Ohio, that involves with the so-called stop and frisk, and making sure that the individuals, and the stop and frisk is a brief pat down so that it's for the protection of the officer. But the Terry stop is a temporary questioning without arrest, and they can, not for a long period of time, demand the name of who you are and if you're suspected of being involved in criminal activity, okay? Next, we deal with resisting arrest. Now, very broadly, in terms of dealing with what is resisting arrest, it says what it says, resisting the arrest. If the police place you under arrest, or you attempt to flee, or you attempt to fight the law enforcement officers, or any form of resisting, then it's very easy for the police to charge that. It says, in order to ensure that the resisting arrest charge is successful, the person must know first that they're under arrest. Now, how do you know when you're under arrest? I have addressed this many times, but I'll just simply remind you again that if the police say you're free, if you ask the question, am I free to go? And they say no, then you are under arrest, because you're not, your liberty is taken away. All right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be the words given. All right? So a person is placed under arrest by the word or action of law enforcement. All right? And it can be implicitly or explicitly. I already kind of gave it to you, but it depends on a case by case. It says it's clear and leaves little room for error and misinterpretation. When law enforcement says you're under arrest, directs the person to put their hands behind their back, then the person is clearly under arrest. But implicit custody is less clear. And its concern is what a reasonable person would believe at the time of the encounter. When an individual believes that they are not free to leave, then they are under arrest. I already kind of explained how you can deal with that issue. So now we get to the heart of resisting arrest. Assaulting the police officer, such as pointing, kicking, spitting, even tussling with them. And unfortunately, police have resorted to using the taser very rapidly in those situations and have resulted in many civil suits against departments and agencies. But be aware of the resisting arrest and obstructing of justice statutes are very based upon the jurisdiction that you're in, okay? And most of them are classified as misdemeanors. And I already have said this before, and I'll say it again. How do you know if something's a misdemeanor? The sentence determines. If it's less than a year, it's a misdemeanor. If it's possibly a year or more, it's a felony, okay? And what is it that generally is asked in most employment opportunities? Have you been convicted of a misdemeanor? Not so. Usually it's felony, all right? So that's resisting arrest. So now let's get to the last part, which deals with, well, no, the next last part is speech. But fleeing from the police, it tells you again. That means you're attempting to get away. That's basically, and you can get away by foot. Now, I will say to you this, that if an individual is fleeing on foot, the police have no right to shoot that individual unless that individual has a weapon, and it has to be a dangerous weapon, all right? Otherwise, you get into excessive force issues. So we're going to spend a little more time dealing with vehicle pursuits, because that's where it's very dangerous. You be driving down the street, minding your own business, on your way to the store or wherever you're going, to church, school, and then all of a sudden the police car comes out of nowhere. Yes, they may have their sirens on, they may not have their sirens on, but they may have lights flashing, or you may hear something like, if you can hear what I'm listening to outside my window. So it's a very serious offense if you do it in a vehicle, because you subject parties, innocent parties, and law enforcement to serious injury and possibly death. And, you know, pursuit can take on the form of the police chasing an individual in the car at high speeds. But there are regulations or procedures or policies for pursuit that is involved in almost every agency. And you want to make sure that you follow those. The key thing is these policies are designed to protect individuals from serious bodily injury and or death. So some factors to consider are what time of the day does this happen, what is the pedestrian and vehicular traffic light, what's the offense that the person has committed. You know, did they steal a bag of chips and they got in a car and drove away, pack of gum or something like that. If it's a serious offense, then, you know, the more serious the offense, the more likely there would be a vehicle pursuit the person gets in. What the weather condition is like, and so what the speeds are that that are being used, not by the individuals in the way, but by the law enforcement officers and then the officers' driving ability. So all of these are involved. There are sample police pursuit policies, as you're familiar with that, or will be, because of the fact that that's going to be involved in your written assignment. And it's going to tell you what some of the policies are. And then there's a little piece here that you can look at, the officer's perspective of dealing with those. Okay? Now, there are techniques such as that you're taught in the academy. I remember when I was in the academy, they taught us about what to do. And they include things like ramming the motorists, using roadblocks to stop the individual. And you'll discover that the ramming the motorist is something that is done in a scientific fashion. It's not just bumping them. There's a method, and I'm not going to go over details, but there are some covered in just a moment. You'll see. So, a fleeing driver suspected of a violent felony increases the speed in an attempt to elude the police, but the suspect stops at all lights and uses turn signals. These behaviors alone are not overly dangerous, and ramming wouldn't be justified. The same suspect in a scenario travels at 90 miles an hour and 30, makes sudden turns, drives through red signals and nearly hits other motorists, then ramming may be justified. So it depends on the circumstances of the case. The Scott v. Harris case, which is included in your written assignment, and then there it is right here, the link to get to that. So now, in order to stop an individual, there are what we call pursuit intervention techniques, and I'm not going to go over them. The key thing is what you're going to do as a police, you can see, is to kind of tap the vehicle so as to get the individual to stop or change their direction. And so I'm not going to go over them, but these are methods that are used by police. And they're shown to save lives. And you've seen them over and over and over. Now, there are also some, and I'll just go over and show you what I'm talking about next, stop sticks. These are what cause tires to go flat. You're familiar with those if you park in a lot and they tell you don't back up or don't try to get out without paying, and if you go over it without the things go down, then they puncture your tires. And so once deflated, most fleeing suspects have to slow down. So they use things like this. Partial roadblocks, that's another thing. I've been involved in some of those. And then the pursuit intervention techniques that I just talked about, stop sticks. Okay. So those are just some. All right. So that's it for dealing with the vehicle pursuit and the pursuits. Then the final section is dealing with disorderly conduct and free speech. So the First Amendment of the Constitution gives you a right to free speech. However, it must be in an orderly fashion. It must not be designed to incite someone. You can protest by picketing or marching, but and then there's certain hours that you have to get permits, and the reason for that is to maintain order and also to have protection. For example, I know the Klan, for example, marched through a Jewish community called Skokie here in Illinois, and they got a court order. The Nazis some years ago, and if you saw the movie The Blues Brothers, got a court order to march in Marquette Park, in one of the parks in Chicago, and they were there to protect the demonstrators. And so you have a First Amendment right. And so it says not all speech, though, is protected. And you're allowed to exchange, as I said, your ideas or protest, but as peacefully and as orderly as possible. Any form of speech that inflames another and likely to cause physical construction, or as we use the term, you can't use fighting words, results in disorderly conduct or breach of the peace. And that can involve obscenity, boisterous language. Now, remember, here's something that you should be aware of. A person can use obscenities as long as it's not directed to an individual. If they're just overall saying it, then, you know, like F the pigs, like, or F the police. And one other course that I taught, when I taught the 11-week course, we talked about some cases that involved that. And we talked about cases like the flag burning and stuff like that. We talked about wearing the armband and marching peacefully. So you have a right to do those things, but it must be done. You can't burn a cross, for example, on somebody's lawn, because that's an intimidating sign. And so that is not protected under the First Amendment, those kind of things. So police officers are actually involved, and they're to protect both individuals. But it says the main function is to protect the constitutional right of the people, that's what I was saying earlier, which may require them to protect and allow a person to demonstrate peacefully. However, if the peaceful protest becomes not so or violates the law, the police are then required to take action to quell that the riot. A riot, as it says, defined by Black's Law Dictionary, which is a dictionary that those of us who are in law school and lawyers are familiar with, says it's a tumultuous disturbance of the peace by three or more assuming together of their own authority. Now notice the intent here, to mutually assist each other against any who shall oppose. That's it. So riots result in property loss, physical injury, loss of life, and so forth, and so forth. And so we're not going to go over this, but if you want to take a look at this 35-minute video, you can learn more about that. And then there's some other links in places. And so that's it. I'm going to just again, before I adjourn, show you again how your key terms. Again, you click on that. Click on flashcards. Then you can allow Adobe, and it will give you a chance to, for example, to go through these questions, these flashcards. Using physical force to resist lawful arrest. And you flip that over and it tells you it's called resisting arrest. Custody that is less clear and is concerned with what a reasonable person would believe at the time of police encounter, and you flip that over. Implicit custody. A tumultuous disturbance of the peace by three or more persons with the intent to mutually assist each other. We just said that, so it's a riot. Then you do the next one. This deliberately or misleading police or withholding information that prevents government from effectively. How about obstruction of justice? There we go. And so those are some of the things you can go. There's more to go. All right. So that's how those work. Notice they all cover what we talked about in the lecture, what's covered in the module, what's covered in your reading as well. Okay. So let's go back to, let's get back to this. Okay, let's eliminate that. Okay, here we go. There we go. So now we go back down. And we deal with another method of helping you. Practice. Free speech or disorderly conduct, and you determine which one it is. Again, you click on it and you open it up, and then you start the activity. A man is walking in the middle of the street in a busy downtown entertainment district yelling profanities. Is this free speech or disorderly conduct? Now, in this instance, he's walking in the middle of the street. Then I would say yelling profanities. I'd say free speech. But let's see. Let's see what it's going to say. So they said not quite, because this disorderly conduct used vulgar and profane language in a public place. Now, remember what I said earlier. There are cases that hold that that individual would be considered free speech as long as he wasn't directing at an individual. So again, that's the thing about the law. So you have to think in terms of how they would answer it. In this course, I see how they're doing it, and I always say this to my students: don't think like I would, because I know how I would think, and I could present arguments to support my position. But you're not going to be able to do that with a multiple choice exam, okay? Abortion activists are standing on a street corner holding signs of aborted fetuses that some citizens have cited as offensive. Is this free speech or disorderly conduct? You might not like it, but it's free speech. You might not like it, but it's free speech. It's not about whether you like it or not. It's about whether or not that person does it in an orderly fashion. But I know what I'm going to do is Edward is watching a movie with some friends inside the theater that is half full. Oh, I know about where this came from. Edward says his friend, watch this, and yells fire. Is this free speech? No way. Because there was a case that we discussed in law school. I think it's Shank. But anyway, it's a case we discovered. You cannot yell fire in a crowded theater. A Supreme Court justice stated that in the opinion. So yes, it's a breach of the peace. All right? So you want to go over each of those. And then, coming down. And above all, please take time to do this quiz. It is not time, but your quiz will be time. So you start the activity. This is about how your days are going to look, as you already know from the quiz you took in week 3. A local resident is suspected of setting off a truck bomb at a religious temple, intentionally targets parishioners. This is an example of, is it eco-terrorism, domestic terrorism, state-sponsored, or international? It said local. So it's local. Okay? So you have to make sure you read it. A foreign national living in your community is part of a terrorist organization from another country and intentionally blows up a city. This is an example of international terrorism. Okay? Remember, it involves another country. And then the last one I'm going to do is you stop a man that you believe was about to break into a store. Okay? But stopped when he saw your marked squad car. You question him. He lies about his name. What will you place him under arrest for? Burglary, obstructing, perjury, or resisting arrest? He's not under oath. He's not under arrest. Remember what I told you. So it's only one left. There it is. Yep. I like it. Let's do one more. A police officer is testifying under oath about an arrest that he made and lies about the reasonable suspicion that was used to make the stop. What criminal law has he violated? He's under oath. He's probably obstructing, but he's under oath. Here it is. Because he was under oath, he lied. All right, and so those are some of the things that you want to look at, and then you want to deal with. Okay. So now that's it for me. I am going to say to you that the key word that I want you to have is obstruction of justice. That's it. I'm not saying it anymore. So you give me that by Sunday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, and you get your 5 points. If you do it Monday, you're going to get 4 points. If you do it Tuesday, you're going to get 3 points, and it diminishes all the way to 0. So with that, hope to see you next week. I'm going to say good night to you.